Like, I got sick at a young age. I said, you got lucky at a young age, right? Because that's the only thing that's going to get you to old age now. We should blame the environment, like 99% of it, and genetics 1%. No news is good news, and an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I think those mantras just were built for like the 1860s.
Welcome to the Wiser Than Before podcast, where each episode we'll get a little wiser. I'm your host, Josh Dodds. On this episode of Wiser Than Before, we're talking about how our guest, a leading longevity doctor, catches health issues 10 to 20 years before conventional doctors. He explains how people run out of hormones 10 to 15 years before they're supposed to, why you can have lots of diseases and still have normal blood work, and why even a ripped athlete can have the low testosterone levels of a 90-year-old. These are just some of the reasons our guest, Dr. Jeff Drobot, searched all over Europe and Asia for better medical approaches. He brought these novel approaches back with him and founded the largest and most preeminent biological medical centers in North America. In this episode, you get the benefit of Dr. Drobot's data from thousands of patient tests your average doctor would never run. You'll learn what your doctor might be missing that you might want to be aware of. You'll also learn the shortcuts to health that Dr. Drobot uses in his clinics, how to improve your health in a manageable way that's not overwhelming, and why Dr. Drobot prefers the lazy way to good health. Enjoy. Dr. Drobot, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What was it that prompted you, after finishing med school, to then start going all these different places in the world, learning about different medical techniques, devices, and looking into things that just weren't well accepted, at least in North America?
I mean, there was in Portland at the time, maybe still is, there was like a traveling circus of just new tech. And I am not naturally a handyman. So like, it wasn't like I was building my ham radios or anything. I was just like, coming from the athletic world, you wanted to see this performance enhancement without having to do biochemistry. And so I learned a lot about supplementation, acupuncture, IV therapy. But then I kind of got introduced to these Germans that were doing a whole bunch of like innovative electrical physics work. And I said, I need to learn. I need to learn more of that. I said, I'm going to go chase this thing down. And that just took me to Germany, Switzerland. I mean, so many different places where they were doing like a lot of electrical, like electroceuticals and electromedicine. So that just prompted my learning. And I never stopped, because you see results when you combine it all together and you have difficult cases. And again, you see a bunch of like things that you didn't think could happen. And you just become kind of this maestro orchestrating this whole thing using all these different modalities. And you learn like how indispensable technology ends up being for the human body.
Right. So were you following your curiosity, or when did you start to see the limitations of what we think over here?
Yeah. So when I went so my background was exercise physiology. Then I was going to go I'm Canadian, so I was going to go into medical school in Canada, which again is it's socialized medicine. So I had a bunch of professors that said, I don't think you want to do that. And then I said, well, what do I want to do then? Because I never had a problem in school. So I went down to naturopathic medical school, which you could be a primary care physician. So I could do all my prescriptions, but I would also learn vitamin, minerals, and everything included herbal medicine. So there are a bunch of different modalities, but it still like did not meet my standards for like what was possible. I always like bring it back to this Rocky IV like visual of Ivan Drago, and he's like hooked up to, I don't know why that stuck with me, but I was like, that is what human potential is going to be. And then they just gave me a little fairy dust like inclination of like, hey, this stuff's happening. And once you get over there, you got to meet a lot of smart people. And I mean, they really were dialed into human physiology, which was very exciting for me.
Great. So what does that mean? How do we contrast human physiology and as a doctor and taking these techniques versus what a person would experience in a typical general practitioner's office? So
medicine was like a ping pong game, right? You come in, you give me a symptom, I hit the ball back, and I give you a prescription or something, right? Something that's going to soothe the ailment. So whether it was a pharmaceutical, and in my training was a pharmaceutical or a nutraceutical, but there was like not a whole bunch of what is the actual problem? Number one, like what's the problem on so many levels? Like instead of just looking at like gastroenterology or the gut, like how did the nervous system fit into the gut? And so like our experience is so much different because of tech, right? When you're doing knee to knee and we're trying to figure out this crossword puzzle in 5 minutes, which is all we have in medicine now, it seems, in primary care. Physicians, that's all they have. I have a bunch of doctors as patients. It's a frustrating game. So they don't have a lot of time, and there was really no like tools to help you do this, look at beyond like what a person was saying and actually look and see what their body was doing and then treat that system that needed to be treated instead of treating a symptom. And even though that's been played out a number of times, treat the person, not the symptom. I mean, it really holds true when you have as much tech and the ability to look at testing as we do. You get to see like how off you would be if you just followed what was coming out of someone's mouth. It's a dangerous game because you end up with 5 different things coming out of somebody's mouth, and that ends up with 5 different pills. And nowadays, I mean, the patient just fights you on taking 4 of them, right? Because they have the same information that you have. Back when I started 20 years ago, the doctor and lawyer were noble professions. Now everybody hates doctors and lawyers because they can do their own research. And they say, no, that stuff's going to shut my kidneys down. And you're like, your kidneys are shutting down. So, I mean, medicine's a tough game of negotiation now. And when you have, the amount of information that we have, that we're able to produce at our clinic, I mean, the people buy in, right? Patient buy-in is still probably the most important thing in medicine. Somebody is disgruntled with their treatment, they probably won't do it, right? And it probably won't work. So when you're going with normal, showing people like this is what physiologically is going wrong with you or biologically going wrong with you, then, they really think they buy it. So it makes medicine easier.
Yeah. I can certainly see that. I mean, in my own experience, what got me so passionate about health is having these health problems and experiencing some of what you're talking about, going to doctors and eventually, really smart people, world-leading physicians, and they want to help, but it is quick, and it was more of addressing the symptoms. Eventually, after enough time, I kind of got this idea in my head. I'm like, well, I don't think I'm ever going to get better from this. I might get in a little relief, but I don't like real see this deep improvement. But one of the things that shook me, because this happened at a relatively young age, and that prompted me to think a lot, is like, well, how could I have headed that off, or how could I know? So I think the information you're talking about, I love it. After going through what I did, I think that's the future. And one of the things I'm really passionate about this podcast is kind of sharing a new mindset to people, but also, practical things. Hey, here's what you can look at, rather than just, I feel good now and I'll go to the doctor once my health collapses.
Or no news is good news, right? That's kind of the motto that we picked in medicine for a long period of time. You go to your doctor every 365 days, and if you don't hear from them, then it must be all good. And I mean, I know that's a dangerous way of thinking in our current environment, because the environment is so much harder on you. And then, like, most people have not a great health experience anymore. I mean, we can just say that, right? Like, the experience is not a good one. You didn't learn, like, docere, the word doctor, the root name docere was supposed to be to teach. That's where it comes from. That's supposed to teach you what you were doing wrong and teach you how to get better. And then unfortunately, like, that relationship is not there between your family doctor and you, or your physician and yourself. You're not really trying to figure out how to get done with the problem. You're just figuring out how to get done with the opposite. And then I'm going to get into a management of symptoms. And then you're going to go home and look on Dr. Google, and you're going to realize, like, I don't want to take this stuff. And then we're back to square one or less, because you said that individual didn't have enough time to talk to me or listen to me. And they're just trying to do the best they can, but their tool box is limited in the time they're doing, right? You say, I come in, I've got this, I can't sleep. And they're like, I'll put you to sleep. And you're like, well, why can't I sleep? Right? I'm doing all these right things. Like, why can't I sleep? I'm going to come in, I'm going to say my stomach hurts, and I'm going to give you like Prilosec. And then you're going to go home and say, I don't want to take Prilosec. And then we're going to just be in the same situation. So you're just lucky that you got that education, because you would have done it. You wouldn't have been given to you, right? You would have had to do it. So it's like, self-care over healthcare now is the motto. And unfortunately, it's like, well, you should learn how your body works anyways, because you're going to have it for the rest of your life. I mean, it's going to be decent. I mean, people know how, like, more about how to work their Mac than they do about what their liver does. So, I mean, you might as well, you'll learn it once. There's not a 2.0, 3.0 coming out. So you get to learn it. And you always just hope it's not in a stressful environment, right? Like, don't have something where you need to go and try to learn about it and learn about a disease at the same time. It's always good. It's still like, health checks are wonderful. Just like taking your car into a mechanic once a year. You may think it's expensive, but it's a wonderful thing to do to keep that car going for a long period of time. So everybody's got a health story. Most of them aren't good anymore. And hopefully we can change the narrative so a lot of them are positive moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What you mentioned about how the environment is so much harder on people now. And that was one of the things that caught me by surprise. I think it catches a lot of people by surprise, meaning your health can deteriorate over time and you're not even realizing how much that environment's taking a toll, again, until it gets later, unless they're, doing more advanced testing or coming to see a clinic like yours. What do you see that's causing the environment to be so much harder? And for new patients that come see you, what are the gaps in people's minds and understanding of what's actually happening in their health versus what they might be perceiving or assuming?
If we look at two systems that are just being like so overrun, our nervous systems, and nobody talks about it. And then we have immune systems and nobody talks about that, right? Because they're two things that really, we don't have a lot of medication to treat. So in medicine, they're not first and foremost, because like nobody wants to take antidepressants and anti-anxieties and sleep medications. Like we don't understand how much digital stimulation we're doing to a nervous system that is not built for that, right? Especially for young kids. It's not built for that, but it's indispensable. We can't do anything about it. So we have that much noise that's going on in the nervous system. And that's got to be a multiple of 1,000 compared to when I started medicine 20 years ago. And then when we go and look at the environment, I mean, it was dirty 25 years ago when I started, and this is like genetically modified food. Like we have to feed everybody. Like there was this practice that came out that probably everybody would take back now, right? Certainly the wheat board would, because everybody's gluten free. So they lost a bunch of customers. I mean, like nobody really won in that, but changing food and then using a bunch of man-made things to keep food around for a long period of time. I mean, that has not had a great effect and has affected, like, we're mammals. Just has not been a good experience for mammals to have all this noise from digital stress and all of this environmental work that your immune system now has to do instead of worrying about what it has to do internally. It's constantly being irritated externally. And then we lose hormones and everything else just going to try to fund these two departments. And eventually we all die, I guess, right? Like we just do it earlier and we don't know our names because we all have dementia. Like that's basically what seems to be happening. Can't breed anymore because nobody has any viable sperm. And so like and everybody says the world's coming to an end, and it's like, just hold on, right? Like your body is an amazing piece of machinery. We just have to understand that we're exposing it to a lot of stuff that is new. It hasn't caught up. Maybe it won't catch up for 3 or 4 more generations. But the goal is, like, when you're using tech to disrupt, you can use different tech to undo it. So tech to make it bad, tech to treat it. We'll end up hopefully with a net zero and bring back human physiology to being a little bit more simple, because the environment has just gotten complicated. I never say good or bad. I just say really complicated because we don't have the ability yet to handle it.
Yeah. No, I like that because, I mean, for every problem, there's a solution. And I was, my perspective changed on that so much over time. Like when you feel horrible and are kind of bedbound, then I would always see the negatives. But at the same time, some of this technology, especially the nervous system stuff, it helped me tremendously. And some of that wasn't even available probably 10 years ago.
It's my favorite. Like people say, what's your favorite treatment? I mean, we do 50,000 treatments. Like what's my favorite treatment? Like I like brain and central nervous system work just because I get the most bang for my buck out of it. Like putting bodies in parasympathetic states and kind of calming down like a lot of the nervous system and brain noise. Like you can just get so much better result from whatever else you're doing. Like, but if that system, which is the most primitive system, if that system remains staticky and it's like a computer with 15 different programs opened and you're trying to like get something more to happen, it's harder when you don't have all the stuff. And that takes tech to be able to do. It's hard when you don't have that modality to be able to iron that thing out a little bit so that the body can respond to any treatment that you're going to do to it.
So where do you like to start with people or anyone listening to this, if they want to look into this, like say, hey, what's the health of my nervous system or immune system or some of these things? You mentioned information that you show your patients earlier. Where do you think is a good place for people to start?
Yeah, I still like when people come in, the first place that they start in my clinic is they start in a diagnostic room. So there's a lot of blood work and stuff that you send externally, and then internally, you want a spaceship of diagnostics so you can assess all these biological systems, right? So lymphatic systems are hard to assess without full body thermographies. Nervous systems are hard to assess without heart rate variabilities and EEGs, right? And then everything else that goes in between that. I mean, those take a little bit of metrics so that you get to see like, this is where the person is, because you just can't tell. Like everybody's is different. Well, sometimes what I think is happening is absolutely opposite to what's happening. And so I'm happy that I have these checkpoints to let me know where to start with the people. And then the treatment, gets dictated by like what they can handle or what they tolerate and what they can really respond to. So where could somebody like EEGs will become better, right? As tech like increases, unfortunately, medicine will probably not adopt this because it's extra training, but you see people with their Oura rings on and Whoop bands, and they have a hard time sampling. So they're a good filter. They're not a great assessment, but at least like they're a start, right? And that technology is only getting better anyways. Like they don't have enough battery power to take 24 hours a day. People are like, oh, I had a crappy day because my Oura ring said I have a crappy day. And I'm like, let's throw that across the parking lot if you're that tied to it, right? My Whoop band said I'm not ready. So I'm not like, what are we doing here? Like when I started, these things were like just little snapshots. They weren't the final exam, right? They're little paragraphs. So the more that we assess it, and I'm glad everybody's getting in for mindfulness, but when you're doing, big diagnostics, you realize that put all the information together, but don't like terrorize yourself with the information.
Yeah. That's definitely, easy to do.
Everything's trackable, and it probably shouldn't, because we said digital noise is a problem, right? Like we don't need to do that all the time. Like animals do. Well, we're animals. We do not like when somebody's looking over our shoulder and like we're irritating ourselves all the time. We should just play. Like, and when we're happiest, we'll just play and we don't have a worry, and the saber-toothed tiger's not coming over the mountain. That's when our health is the highest. It's not when we're paying the most attention to it. I promise you that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, it's kind of a vicious circle. You start feeling worse or seeing your health drop, then you look into more of these things, and yeah, it can totally spiral. I certainly did.
Yeah, you know better than anybody. Your laundry, like your health becomes your job, right? And then because you can't get a plan, it's your plan. And anytime it's your plan, it'll consist of everything, right? Because you're like trying to get at all angles. You're up at midnight, like researching this unique something or other in some foreign land. And that's going to be now Amazon right to your door. And like you wake up in the morning, you got 5,000 pills to take. You're doing 3 hours of breath work, right? And you're just basically eating a piece of kale. And you're like, man, I think I'm going to beat this. And I'm like, wow, that's 3 full-time jobs, right? It's hard because you want the best result, but you put so much stress and so much effort into the best result. And so it's very time consuming and stressful. So yeah, it's better when you just get a few tests, find out where you should focus on, go in that direction, and then leave the rest of the noise out.
Right. Which is really the trick, because when you're talking about the data, one thought that popped in my head is like definitely the interpretation and application with that data is really what matters. I mean, the first step is collecting it, but the same data in different person's hands or different doctor or practitioner. I mean, there's so many different opinions and routes to go. So obviously, I think the best thing is if someone can work with someone like you or whoever, someone they trust, and they're like, all right, we're going on a good path, and this person knows. But to what you said earlier, a lot of people have been to 5-10 doctors searching for an answer, and it's not just the doctor's fault either, because the doctor gets this person who's just maybe run their health into the ground or isn't doing their part too. So it's just it's a very two people coming together in a difficult situation. So I think working with someone in a noble profession, a doctor, something like that, but also people understanding what should be in their wheelhouse so that they can do without it feeling like 3 full-time jobs, like you said. Because with social media, it's probably not going to stop. You get 100 different opinions and influencers and things coming at all different angles. So how does a person assess that and make good decisions without overwhelming themselves? It's a little wild right now.
I don't know how you would. Like if you just came, like I've been doing this every day forever, right? For literally forever, like when I was a kid. Like I don't know how you would just come without learning the basics, right? Like that's why I wish they taught you biology, like human physiology and biology a little bit, so you had a framework to put some of this information in. Because or else it's just like you're bombarded with, a ton of treatments and information, some helpful, some confusing, and you just chase your tail all over the place. And you don't even know really, like you forgot what you're treating, right? That you're treating some like rare microbe that you just all of a sudden like glued onto. And for whatever reason, that resonated, that information like stuck with you. And you're going down the wrong path, right? But there's a ton of instruction out there. You just have to be like, I wish people would just stand back and observe it for a second before they act on it. Right now, social media is so smart, right? It's like there's all kinds of emotional tags in there, right? There's testimonials and there's stuff, but I mean, it didn't used to happen, and I don't know how you navigate that right now, except sit back and listen to the information as if they're just stories, right? Listen to the stories. When you learn enough listening to the stories for a long enough period of time, start to look for a similarity, and then like go with that, because sometimes like it's always going to be true. You are your best doctor because you care the most about yourself. You care the most about the result. The trouble is like you're too emotionally connected to it, and like too much information is bad information. So you end up doing too much in the end. It's like going to the gym and working on every piece of machinery and then wondering why like you don't have big biceps, right? Like half of the time you did it, half the time you're undoing it. And in the end, you just tired the whole freaking thing out. So you're like exhausted and like, man, I really put 2 hours into the gym. And like in exercise physiology, you'd be like, what were you doing? Right? Like, well, why did you did all these antagonistic muscles? Like you just ripped everything down. And then you just did it again the next day. So it doesn't change. Bodies still need direction. They still need intelligence. They need you to have some kind of a plan. And then they'll execute on that pretty decently if they're okay.
Yeah. What are some of, and I know you do a lot in your clinics, and it's different for everybody, but what are some of the primary treatments, the most common, either treatments or the technology that you use?
I mean, nowadays with depending on what people come in with, so we see a lot of chronic fatigue these days. I mean, we do a lot of longevity work too, but those are pretty easy patients. But a lot of chronic fatigue, a lot of immune dysregulation now, a lot of autoimmune conditions, and young people too. A lot of infertility. I mean, there's just a lot of like confusion and burdening of the lymphatic and immune system. So we do a bunch of lymphatic work. IV therapy is pretty simple. We do a bunch of blood filtering with EBO2 treatments. We use exosomes, V cells, stem cells. So a lot of it is cleaning it up first, right? We have a little circuit called Foxy Detox, which is lymphatic and ozone carbonic acid saunas, and then closed system colonics. So oil changes for the general public. You want to get the oil change first before you add a bunch of stuff in there, because oftentimes you got to get stuff out before you add new stuff, or else you're just putting it in the same dirty pond that you had before. So I like to use tech with that. So like I said, full body lymphatics, we got 4 different ways we do that, and carbonic acid saunas and microcurrents to move lymphatics, and then colonics because needs an exit. And then we'll end up getting into the fancier things like V cell, very small embryonic, like stem cell. So the regenerative stuff that really, we plant new seeds in this fertile soil that we've made. And interesting enough, when you do those modalities and you stand back, you see a lot of the little symptoms just get better, right? Because we treat like big systems in our clinic. So nervous systems, immune systems, lymphatic systems. And then if we have to sprinkle some hormones or stuff on there, and then instead of like whatever somebody comes in with, like we're just rebuilding biology and physiology. And then you stand back and it's like stitching up a cut. You just watch it mend, and you didn't really have to jab the cut every single day with 15 different things. You just put a nice environment together, and body does what the body does. Sometimes it just needs a little extra regeneration, but the body will always do what the body does.
Yeah, I love it. Taking more of this holistic view as opposed to, the one.
It may be the lazier view, right? Like people will say like, hey, like, why? Like I have so many treatments and you didn't actually treat like my arthritis. And I'm like, just wait, I didn't need to treat your arthritis, right? Like I just treated you. And again, even though that's like, I'm like, oh, treat the person. It's like, no, like do the biggest systems where you get the biggest bang for the buck and see what happens. And then if I need to do local treatments, I'll do local treatments. But I'm like, maybe like I said, maybe it's lazy, but I'll just do the most bang for the buck and use the most tools to do systemic treatments over local treatments. I hate local treatments. I think like they just end up to be clumsy and like they don't get deep enough to make long-standing effects. So we like long-standing effects because people fly in from all over the world to do it, right? You just got to have fancy equipment, but it really brings the most reward for what you're doing.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I spent a lot of time chasing my tail with, symptom chasing or this thing or that thing. So, and eventually it was the things that worked are more like what you're saying.
Yeah, but look how much you learned, right? Like it's always, and now you got a podcast. Like look, like it always goes to a good cause. Like if you don't get frustrated with it and doesn't kill you, it always goes to a good cause, right? You got some education.
Yeah, it felt close there for a little while, but I definitely did, and it's great. I mean, I think like that's why I have the podcast. Like you can't. My life changed so foundationally. 2 times. The first time I got like allergies, horrible, out of nowhere at age 19. Suffered for many years and did exactly some of the things you're saying, like took the drugs for a while. Then in my mid-20s, I wised up a little bit and did a little research and saw the side effects of some of those, strong steroids. I'm like, I don't want this, every year. And what changed it then was my sister gave me a book on nutrition and basically what the Western diet does to your digestive system. And it just blew my mind. And so right then I stopped eating out. I was a busy professional eating out at least 2, maybe 3 times a day and all this stuff. So I just changed it. And in like 2 months, all my symptoms went away and it was just profound. So when something like that happens, you want to tell everybody. And then fast forward, 10, 15 years and another health issue, but the nutrition wasn't enough this time. And that's why I'm talking to experts like you, and it blew my mind again. But when that happened to me, I was like, everything I believed was incorrect in a way. Maybe not everything, but a lot about health, about how the whole healthcare system works, about what I need to do to have a long and healthy life. And you can't help but want to talk about it more and spread that.
And you're not going to unlearn it. Right? Like you went through it, like you learned some things. You're not going to have to unlearn it because like I said, you're not getting a liver 3.0. Like you start to realize, again, the environment's a weird spot, right? Like when you go back to simpler foods, right? People are like healthy food. I'm like, you know what? Healthy food is simpler, right? They're just like, your body knows what to do with that. And then we get into the religion of food where it's paleo versus keto versus vegan. It's like, shut up, right? Stop doing that. Europe doesn't do that. No other place in the world does this except North America, where we try to like make food one poison or another poison. It's like, just relax for a sec. That's what I'm saying with social. Just relax. Like just eat whole foods. That's all that used to be available. Like in Canada, when I was a kid, like McDonald's, we had one, right? Like we didn't have a lot of stuff. So you went to the grocery store and food was like not as genetically modified. And so like, it was simple. That's all you're supposed to do, right? Just supposed to get carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. That's it, right? However you end up doing that, sprinkle some extra mineral and some vitamins on that. And that's as complicated as food gets. They're just building blocks and fuel. There's no like pixie dust in those. So you shouldn't be stressed. You should be stressed when you're starving. You shouldn't be stressed when you're eating, but you have to eat real food. If you eat modified food, then like I said, just like that digital noise from these things, that immune system just has constant amounts of work. And if it has to continually do external work, then it's not going to be able to do internal work, and you're going to get histamine and every other symptom. So like what you did is you just added by subtracting, right? You said like, I'm not going to work my immune system as hard. And then you saw like it had extra ability to go deal with some grasses at a certain time of season. Good, done, problem solved. We're over that, right? And then, but in medicine, the strange thing is we never take that approach, right? We're like, well, we'll just keep adding things, right? You're adding three Whoppers a day or whatever it is, and then we're adding like Benadryls and everything. And you're like, wow, I just feel like crap. And it's like, well, if you look at the math, like that's the appropriate feeling to doing all that, right? You should feel like crap. Like we got a desired outcome, right? You wanted it. You're quick. You're doing everything fast. It's costing you $12.99 for the whole dinner. And I mean, yeah, you're going to feel like crap. That's the desired outcome of it. If we draw this out on paper, that's what it looks like. So like you get to see, but you wish somebody would have just sent that to you. We're like, hey, why don't you take a break from dairy and bananas so you're not like a piece of fly paper, like attracting all this grass. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, I'll just do that for 3 months so I'm not bleeding out of my eyes. And then you'll be like, hey, that solves all the problems. So yeah, I mean, you wish it would be that simple. Like we should have taught that to you in high school. And then in medicine, like we used to do that. Somebody used to come to your house and be like, hey, this happens every year. Like, why don't you stop eating that burger and let's just see what happens? And you'd be like, guess what, doc? I'm better. And they would have said, okay, that's what we're doing every single April. And so you learned. It just took a little bit of time. And then you saw like when you go into medicine was just trying to undo what you were doing to yourself. And you're like, well, if you just would have told me what I was doing, I probably wouldn't have done it. So again, all good information, right? Now you're passing it to the masses.
Yeah. Exactly. Because I mean, one of the worst things that can happen is you do one of those surface treatments and you get the result, because then you think the problem solved. I thought my problem was solved. And that's why I like your systemic approach and also the data, because I was like, man, like it did make sense. Clean up the diet and then feel better. But I didn't get all the underlying things, and like the nervous system, I was totally, oblivious to. So it's like, it's just lit a fire under me. Like, okay, how do we understand this a little better so people have tools before they get to the point of crashing? So more people can be like your longevity patients. They come in reasonably healthy and want to do more versus I'm in a health collapse and how do we dig out of this?
They just want to live till they're 150 years old, right? Like they're in a good problem now. And a lot of them started in like a lot of them got introduced to this from like you, right? Like, hey, like now I came from a spot that was not desirable. And now I'm going to make sure that I have my 100 years of desired like ability to do whatever I want to at whatever age and still be able to write my name, right? And that, I think now, unfortunately, like that's not a passive process anymore, right? Longevity used to be like, let's just go in our fields and we'll get on our combine and we'll like do some stuff. We'll stay active and we'll eat good foods and we'll live to 95. And longevity is not passive anymore. Longevity needs activity because the environment has worked so hard against you that you need to do these things in order to ensure like your last 20 years are the 20 years that you want. Because now we can already, if we just leave it to its own resources, like we see what that last 20 years looks like, and it's not desirable. So people your age are like, they're getting to see that in the front row seat. And so that's why they're starting to be more active. Like when you were 30 or 20 or whatever it was, like you didn't give a rat's butt about what you were doing for your health. Like it was a passive process. You were having fun. You're using up your health at that time. And then you would get your health back because you just stopped doing all that stuff. And now it's like, unfortunately, it's a very active process of what you need to do to stay healthy and to stay productive. And I mean, that takes a little bit of investment and work, but the investment is well worth it. And the work is not difficult.
I completely agree. The only thing that's difficult about it is it's a habit change. So we all resist habit change. Our nervous system does. So what do you find that anything helps your patients see this, or what wakes them up to that? Is it other than like major health issues? Do the numbers, do the tests sometimes help them, or what helps people get this? Yeah.
Like people get to see the end result, right? There's not that many things. Like if you just mention, we'll just go with the 3 C's, like I say, like cancer, cognitive decline, and cardiovascular disease, right? You look at those 3 C's. They're not imaginary. People know them. They've been usually touched by them at some point. So anytime you like do the assessment and you get to see like, this is under the surface. Whereas like looking at your bank account and seeing you have $100 left, like you're not trying to get to zero. Like you will change your spending habit, right? Like everybody understands that concept. If you don't see it, then no news is good news, right? Nothing's happening. I'm going to go on and do it. If you would have never had those allergies, what would your diet be like today? Probably similar to what it was. You would have got away with it for a long enough period of time. It wouldn't have prompted change. Like people are always like, oh, I got sick at a young age. I say you got lucky at a young age, right? Because that's the only thing that's going to get you to old age now is that you got sick at young age and we're able to uncover and undo it. When you're older, that doesn't happen like that simply. So sometimes it's unrecoverable because it's a 50-year problem. So people that get sick are lucky when they get younger, if they get healthy, if they get educated, because now your life and your health trajectory has remarkably changed because you were sick for 5 years. Like good time of life, right? Just able to manage it. Even though your eyes are bleeding, you could still do some stuff, but you're like, look, and I had the propensity to still have a young enough shelf life that things healed faster than they would have if you were 20 years down the road. But people are always like, well, I wouldn't have made the change. And I'm like, no, you wouldn't have. Because every human is like, it's hard to do something good if you're not motivated to do it, right? It's hard to go to the gym if like you don't have a reason to do it. Like there's very few people that'll be able to do that unless you're motivated by something that hasn't happened yet, which is usually like doom and gloom, or something that did happen, which you're thankful that it'll never happen again. So I think I think assessments and seeing what's going on under the surface, and we should all see that anyways, right? Like you do your taxes once a year, so you see what you're supposed to be doing, right? Like you're not supposed to be scared of them because it means you didn't wrong, right? But you're just using things as a guide. And again, a routine physical just doesn't happen anymore, right? Like blood work is kind of BS because we only do routine screening blood work, and you basically have to be stage 4 for some of that to happen. And so like you have to go for a deeper dive into your health.
Can you go into that just a little bit more about what someone say they got routine blood work, they got a physical, they in their head, they're like, okay, no news is good news, basically. What are they not aware of? What isn't really shared about what's missing from that picture?
Yeah, I think that like people don't understand how small a compartment and how tightly regulated the bloodstream is, right? Like some has to really go wrong. Like besides having blood lipids like cholesterol high, like nothing is really going to be discovered. Like you got white blood cells, red blood cells, liver enzymes, kidney function tests, and blood lipids. And again, besides like blood lipids, which can go up and down, like the rest of them, something usually has to be going wrong. Like you can be stage 2 or whatever. You can have lots of diseases that have normal blood work. Like think about like a lot of these things are 30-year processes, like dementia, cognitive decline, like cancer, cardiovascular disease. Like you name any of those, they're not 1-year processes. They're 30, 40, 50-year processes, and you've aced your blood work for the last like 49 years. Like there's something wrong with that. Like medicine has even come out and said that's not an evaluation of health, right? That's a screening test. Let's not get this messed up, right? That is not what you're supposed to use to decide whether you're healthy or not. You were supposed to do and again, there were supposed to be more metrics to it. Now, this would have been found if your family doctor again came to you for an hour and knew you and was like, hey, let's go through all this stuff. Let's sit down for an hour and see what aches and pains and ailments and what changed in your life. And because we're supposed to have that as a family doctor that knew us like a veterinarian did. I still think veterinarians are the best doctors because the patients don't talk and they spend a lot of time. Don't just do a blood work on your cat and say that looks good to go. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that because they're doing a full biological and physiological assessment. So I think people somehow got that no news is good news and an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I think those mantras just were built for the 1860s. Now, you got to spend some time once a year, some money once a year, and really assess immune systems, nervous systems, lymphatic systems, and hormone systems. Those four dictate what cardiovascular systems are going to do, right? These things, these long-term systems like brains and hearts and kidneys, they're going to be there. But the process that is putting on them, that's really going to dictate what happens or not. So looking at your immune systems, nervous systems, lymphatic systems, and hormonal systems, just making sure you're paying the daily bills, that will save your butt a lot of pain and misery later. But it's not standard medicine, right? It's not even maybe alternative medicine. It's innovative medicine, right? If people say futuristic, and I'm like, it's not futuristic, right? It's not futuristic. It's just a different way to look at the same thing that's been there for centuries, millennia, and you're supposed to look at it so you can assess it now.
Yeah, it's just not status quo. It's not, the cookie cutter thing you receive. And I agree with what you said. Maybe in prior generations that would cut it. Grandma and grandpa, they lived till 90 and 95 and, enjoyed life till late. Now it's possible, probably for the first time in history, you can live the last 20, 30 years of your life in a nursing home with a low quality of life, so it's
not knowing your name. That's there used to be a badge of honor to say, I haven't seen the doctor in 70 years. And it's man, you're doing excellent, right? Don't go. Half the time you'd be don't go because we don't need, you're doing fine. Run your machine the way you're doing, right? That's the George Burns syndrome, right? Keep smoking your cigarettes, drinking your, just don't change a thing because you got this thing figured out. You're 90 years old. Why would you change anything at that time? And that was a long time ago. Nowadays, it's things are accumulating. We know that. You can do a urine toxicity test. It's horrifying, right? None of those things are good for you, and they're all environmental pollutants. And you're being exposed to them, whether you're eating organic or not. It's just the level that you're being exposed to. So do some of these things, not to scare yourself, but just you're lessening the environmental load so that normal physiology can operate as you want it, not using it up by the time you're 40 and then having symptom management degeneration from 40 to 60 and then 60 to 80 is a nightmare, right? It's disaster. And that's pretty much seems to be the norm now, right? If we don't manage it, it degenerates and we'll be under hospice care for a while. And that's no exaggeration. We can look around and see that doesn't look good if we don't manage it for a long period of time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this conversation. But you know what? I want to bring you even better content in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by hitting the follow button on your phone in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever app you prefer. Now, if we're being honest with each other, you and I both know there's no way you're going to do this later. So let's take 7 seconds right now, and I'll walk you through the process. Pull out your phone, unlock it, and open Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the listening app of your choice. Now search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and hit follow. In Apple, that's the plus sign in the top right corner. And in Spotify, it's the button with the word follow just below the logo. That's it. You're all done. Doesn't it feel good to cross an item off your to-do list? Thank you for doing that. By hitting that follow button, you are actively bringing better guests and content to this podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. Like if someone's now motivated, like, all right, I want to do something. Obviously, we'll link to your clinic too, but is there a type of care, like a name for what you do, or where could someone, they can either look you up or where else could they start?
So biological medicine. So when I got into this whole tech plus biochemistry plus pharmaceutical, which essentially is everything, right? Europe did it well in the sense that they actually looked at the physiology or the biology. That's why it's called biology. First name biological, last name medicine, right? And then there's functional medicine, which does more biochemistry, but biological medicine, because they looked at the dentistry, the teeth, like they went all the way down. So the best thing is to find, somebody that practices something like that. And it doesn't have to be a doctor, but usually they are, because you have to have medical licenses to do all this treatment. But biological medicine, like the assessment always involved like a lot of this biological testing, because then you do the treatment based on the assessment. And I guess functional medicine in North America everybody's heard of that, or at least some people have heard of that. But it missed like it missed the lymphatic, missed a bunch of testing, right? It just did blood work and urine tests and stool tests. And then based on supplementing deficiencies, right? Which again, sometimes you got to remove before you add. So looking at biological medicine, I think that's like, I think finding people familiar with that, as you still have your primary care physician, right? You still got these people that are doing second and third looks. But if you really want to learn about like how your machine runs, then you need to do the assessments, because everybody's different. I'm just telling you that. Everybody's different. But once you learn it, a smile will come across your face and you'll say, okay, now I know what I'm going to focus on. Because some people, it's nervous systems are overtaxed. Some people, immune systems are weak from past hereditary. Like everybody's got a little bit of a secret sauce, and you just need to figure out what that one is, and then enjoy life, turn it off, and just put your weaknesses to your strengths, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And then that's also one thing I made an impression on me, and that I realized I had to change my thinking. It's just like, I understand the medical system differently. And like what you're describing, that's not in general healthcare, and it's not right or wrong. It just is. That I totally agree. Keep your GP. There's reasons for it, but they're not going to look at all the things we're talking about. And also, it's not their job to fix you, right? And do some of these things. So there's a huge, everything just kind of gets lumped and thrown in there. And like you said, doctors are frustrated, patients are frustrated. And it's like, we're using the wrong tool, we're using a hammer when you need a screwdriver. And of course, that's going to be frustrating.
Like everybody will say, trust me, people are like, everybody will say medicine is in a bad spot. Doctors, research, like everybody will say this. But I'll tell you what, if you get in a rollover car accident, it'll save your butt, right? So people are like, I hate conventional medicine. I'm like, you hate conventional medicine? Like, what will happen when you're getting that accident? And like, what do you think you think my vitamin C is going to save you? Because it isn't, right? So like, not supposed to hate anything with the last name medicine. We're just supposed to like include different things. It's like, if I eat Chinese food every day and one day I hate it, like I hate all food. It's like, no. Like that was specific discipline. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to have a bunch of different disciplines, because it's your body, right? You should want to know as much about your body as you can, so that you can figure out how you're going to run it optimally for as long as you can, because you will need it. And I think that is not done in 10 minutes at your GP's office. They don't have the tools to do it. They don't have the time to do it. And trust me, they're more stressed than you are with trying to figure that stuff out. So that's a health check or symptom management. Like that is disease management. That is not health, and it certainly isn't longevity, right? That is simply like put cream on that and stop stepping in poison ivy. That's basically what that goes. And people don't like that anymore, because it bleeds into systemic stuff like cholesterol and all that, right? Where we're like, well, you're telling me to take this for the rest of my life. And then you go home and you read like there's a dementia correlation to that. So like it wasn't meant for that. It was meant for triage, acute care. And then if the doctor had an hour and you only gave him 100 patients and he studied them, like again, that veterinarian did, you'd know Ralph the dog pretty well. And you'd just be like, yeah, stop feeding Ralph the dog that and like take him for a walk and de-stress. That's it. And then Ralph the dog would do pretty well. But the doctor has so many different things. There's no personal connection to that. So they can't really study you and know like what they're managing. So it's just like, it's all a knot. And that probably won't be solved. So being your best health advocate and learning the most about your biology and physiology so you don't need to learn about your pathology is the best way to attack.
I like that. That should be a motto or something. Maybe it is for you, but that sums it up pretty well.
It's going to be yours.
Yeah, I'll take it. So let's talk. So you also do work with professional athletes and in that arena. And this was just added to the list of things that surprised me. I grew up playing sports. I was a collegiate athlete, and I used to associate health pretty closely with physical fitness. And that was also a great wake-up call. So for all these years, I was like, I'm in shape. I can do all these things. I'm pretty healthy till I wasn't. Can you, from your view, what's the difference between that physical health and performance versus deep, comprehensive health?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because again, the same biology and physiology, like we're just going to run it. Like, and if we're going to, there used to be an off season in sports. So I take care of a lot of professional sports. So I'll just preface this by saying there's play and then there's fitness and then there's sport, right? And health lives somewhere between play and fitness. Like between fitness and sport is stress and work and breakdown. And sport, which I call most like all contact sports or gymnastics, figure skating, swimming, I just call them sacrificial sports because you're going to give up physiology to try to continue to do it. And especially if you play pro sports and, you're governed by rules, which we all follow that say, we can't add back physiology like hormones to it, even if they're low and you've had 3 or 4 concussions or you've had surgeries, then to me, like you're sacrificing physiology and biology to do your sport. That's not fitness. That's not play. So by the time you get into collegiate and pro levels, you're breaking it down, right? Like your body is physically breaking down. There's not probably enough of an off season. Half the time you don't even enjoy what you're doing anymore. You're just doing it because that's what you do. And half the time you're hurt, right? So a lot of it is pro sports, a show business. You're usually hurt and stressed and try to do the best job you can. The fun of it and the play of it is out because it's really like, it's a hard process. So good thing is when you can use biochemistry again, we use physics and we use different treatments. So you can catch up to it. But again, when you take an athlete and you just look from the surface, you would never guess what's happening under the hood, right? You'd never guess like, oh, that person is jacked. It would be like, that person has a testosterone of a 90-year-old, right? Like one more hit to the head and we're in a lot of trouble. Like in the future, one more shoulder surgery. And you know how that feels, right? There's no days off, right? No days off, 2 days, no days off. And it's like all the mantras, because you're playing for scholarships, money that you don't have to pay, or you're playing for money that somebody's paying for you, right? But either way, something's going to happen to your physiology where it's going to be a bigger bill to pay. And so my exercise physiology that went into medicine was always to try to get more out of human physiology. And that's where the tech played in. So athletes are not healthy. There's just no way they can be just because of the amount of stress and the amount of wear and tear. And nobody has an off season anymore. So pro athletes, you're just trying to keep them up, right? Trying to keep them up, trying to keep on the field. And you try to like have you worry about quality of life after they're done playing.
Yeah, I think about that a lot now. I mean, there's a little bit of this with NFL, but mainly with the concussions. But it's like, how many pro high-level athletes do you see age well, into the later years? And then you can see it, but it doesn't really get talked about too much.
No, you don't roll them out. You don't roll out somebody limping. You don't roll out boxers. You don't roll out Olympic marathoners because they can't walk. Like this, it's not a good look. Like it's hard because those people are just supposed to be gladiators and they're somewhere on a farm somewhere living their life. You're not supposed to look at like what that looks like after you break that down for 30 years. And it's really changing, especially contact sports, of course, with some of the conversations. You see youth sport, it's being affected by it because, again, it used to be for a season and now it's for a year. So the number of hits or the number of injuries compound times 3 because you're playing it full time. Because, again, you see some bozo on social media not stop it. And then you're like, man, oh, well, I can't see that. So now I'm going to have to go do like my 50 miles that week. It's supposed to be my week off because Joe is just posting on his Instagram like he's not stopping at all. So, I mean, that's a hard thing because you're training even when you're supposed to be resting and recovering. And the people then just get to be so big, so fast. The sports has to get faster, has to be more entertaining. So, the collisions and injuries are always going to be higher and the stress is always going to be larger because like it's all under microscopes now.
Yeah. So let's put the collisions and physical clashes aside, even just, so you're mentioning stress, but I feel this is something, even with non-professional athletes, people, again, one of the first things people think about is like speaking of Rocky, like a Rocky montage, like, okay, I'm going to get my health back. So I'm going to get in shape and not realizing that exercises or physical exertion past a certain point is actually a stressor. And that's, sure, the body can grow back stronger if it's done in the right way. But when you add things from the environment, you mentioned all the tech, all these stimulation that human beings have rarely had in history. And then on top of it, start pushing the body a lot, restricting the diet, then it's just like boom, boom, boom. You got a big stack of stressors. So what, just for an average person, is there a way to think about their physical exertion? I love the scale you gave, how there actually starts with play, because the more in play, it's just, that's the stress-free zone movement. Mm-hmm.
It's always good to want something more, but like the exercise is a stimulus. Like it's not the response, right? And then when you're given the stimulus, like you have to give enough that you're able to respond to it to do a bigger stimulus later. So even again, looking at anabolic hormones, total free testosterone, cortisol, DHEA, pregnenolone, like if you're going to get into this level of like Iron Man, where you're just going to get into anything that's like, I'm going to fit this into a day. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. Like where they say, I'm going to fit this, like I need to work out because it's the only way I handle stress. And I'm like, hold on. Like you're using a stress to undo a stress, right? That's the same thing. Maybe not in the same context, but you're like, I'm going to use alcohol to calm me down at the end of a day. Like that is a stress to get rid of a stress. Just say it what it is. It's not play, right? Somewhere sits between fitness, right? I'm going to do something because I want to do something to feel good about doing the other things that I don't feel good about. And then if it becomes like, what was your ability to respond to that? Were you getting stronger? Obviously, exercise is a stimulant. That's why people like it. So like, but do you have to do exercise? Like, are you recovering from exercise? Are you enjoying the exercise? And are you getting a response to the exercise? If you're not, change the recipe or change the time or change the intensity and volume, right? And because it is an extra thing. Like you don't see lions just sitting on the African plains, just deciding to rip around for a couple laps. Like it is not what you do. Like we're supposed to be moving, but we're supposed to be moving a little bit all day. Like doing ballistic movements or tearing things down. Yeah, we're supposed to do that for a period of time. Males do that in a rut. And again, I think a lot of it comes back to like just doing things that, physiology and biology were meant to do. And then when you take them to 12 months a year, no, that's not normal. Right? It just never was done before, because if it was, stop doing it and see what your normal, see where it lands. It will not land there, right? Like it will land somewhere between there and there, but you'll see you can't keep it up. It's not like once I read a book or learn a language, I have the language. It's like, no, it's extra resources to run that system that you decided. So be cognizant of what you're doing. Know that you can get the response to be able to do it. And then like, don't overdo it. Like getting a t-shirt is not worth like wrecking your physiology. If you want a t-shirt, then make sure that you're doing the assessment so that you can get your marathon t-shirt and you're like, yeah, look what I did. Okay, great. Now let's make sure that we're rebuilding after we do it. So again, all of that stuff gets recorded in history to be played later when you run out of hormones 10 or 15 years before you were supposed to. Because again, the wear and tear that we put on it and fitting in the extra stuff. And if it's truly what it's supposed to do, you will make other time for it, right? It shouldn't be fit in at 4:30 in the morning because you got 5,000 emails to do. Get rid of the emails then, right? Do something where it's not a stress added to a stress so that on paper it looks like you did something good because physiologically you did something more. So I think again, that play to fitness, the sport, being an exercise and just seeing it every single day, seeing what happens to corporate people when they overdo physical work to get rid of corporate stress. It's very linear, happens to a bunch of them. I got a billion CEOs that like you would look at and you would say, how's that person running the company? And I was like, that's all that person can do because their life is like a mess, right? They're tired. They can't sleep. They're wired, but they're good at one thing. Unfortunately, again, everything comes to an end when you can't manage and balance it.
Yeah, it really does. One thing that surprised me was how poor I was at evaluating the stress. Because we have these conversations and we'll all be like, yeah, that makes sense. But I didn't realize, and so I'd try and make these little adjustments, but that's all they were. They weren't really moving the needle until, it caught up to me exactly like you're saying. So I find that people can get the concept, but it takes a little bit more for it to really sink in or for them to really make a change because we all have blind spots. We're used to our way of being. So if we're used to being in red line, then a little bit less red line is like, oh yeah, I'm relaxing now. And that's what I, really found value in the test. It's got me super curious in what you do, or just anything that can show a more objective reflection to me, to a person of here's actually where your nervous system is, where your stress level is, and then we can make, better decisions.
Yeah, because stress is a bad term, but it's a negative term. People don't like it. Like, stop saying stress and just, like you said, see where your nervous system is. That's not positive. That's not negative. Just see where the position is and then see what we need to add or remove to make that system more balanced. And sometimes it's not like 10 hours of meditation. Sometimes 10 hours of meditation is the stress, right? Sometimes like trying to get to my quiet space is a stress. Like if you're not an animal that can practice silence, don't try to train that animal. Right? Like the dog barks all the time. Like let the dog bark. Like it's more relaxing to have the dog bark than it is trying to muzzle the dog so you don't bark. Like we have these things in our mind that we're trying to get to this greatness or this, and it's just BS, to tell you the truth. Again, doing metrics and being in and going down as many rabbit holes as I have, everybody like has some program that they need to follow. And sometimes it's not quiet. And sometimes it is like a bunch of work. And sometimes it is chaos. And as long as you're managing physiology, like you can be very successful and do whatever you want to do enjoyably for an extended period of time.
What are your favorite ways to support the nervous system or help someone bring that down? Because I learned a lot about this and I did all the self stuff, meditation, like you're mentioning. I did tons of somatics and movement and exploring, emotions. It was great. And after a period, it was great, but it was another example of I don't feel it moved the needle enough. And then when my health really crashed, one of the things that helped a lot was neurofeedback. And I couldn't believe how the first time I did it, I went home and then, like a week of it, and then went back home and started reading a book and was just flying through the pages in comparison to what I was doing before. I was probably reading like a normal person then and hadn't realized like how slow. I'm like, oh, wow. And then a later session I did, a group of sessions I did, suddenly I had, my energy was 50% improved. And that's after years of doing the biochemistry that you're talking about, the pills and supplements and things. So I was like, wow, this can really move the needle fast. That totally changed my view on the technology and how it can be a big piece of improving health, not just adding noise that's a stressor. But what do you see working well for people?
I mean, we still we use a bunch of acoustic therapies like sound beds. So there's two different peripheral nervous systems, right? Autonomic nervous systems and central nervous systems. So central nervous systems, we use transmagnetic stimulation. I mean, it's a whole operation, and neurofeedback and brainstem, right? Peripheral nervous systems, we use audiovisual entrainment, still great. We have a company that I'm involved with called Cerebral Fit, and like that, doing those audiovisual stimulators just to put your body actively into a parasympathetic state, beautiful, right? Then you don't have to practice this stuff. Like, I don't have a lot of time, which again, I could not. My mom put me in meditation classes when I was 6, right? And so we learned all this for a long period of time, but it's not that animal, right? I can't be, I don't like to be quieted down. So pulse electromagnetic fields, put that charge back in the body. Really, my thing is active, right? I like to do relaxation by activity. Like you said, neurofeedback, that's activity, right? You found like, hey, when I did activity, cleaned up a bunch of this noise, and then whatever was underneath, I actually had the power to do this cognitive processing. And then you see like physically, hey, I got a lot more flexibility. I like that kind of stuff. So pulse electromagnetic therapies, brainstem, audiovisual entrainment, transmagnetic stimulation, acoustic therapy, power. Best stuff you can do.
So if someone comes and works with you at the center, then between you and your team, do you, just from your experience of all the patients, do you kind of recommend of those things you mentioned, hey, for you, here's the 1 or 2 we're gonna do that you should start with, something like that?
Yeah. You just find we find the hole in the bucket, right? What system is struggling? And then sometimes, like I said, I'll do systemic therapies like EBO2 blood filtering and put some exosomes or stuff. Sometimes I just say, you know what? Too many things, too long, too much medical intervention. So I'll just clean up all the physiology with blood filtering. We'll put V cells or exosomes or umbilical stem cells in there. And then I'll do the nervous system work to calm down that sympathetic nervous system that's been agitated for so long. And you're like, voila, restart, right? Restart this problem. And the good thing about my patients is people are like, wow, you cheat. You go back, and I'm like, no. Like reset. Right? We don't cheat. We reset. And the person very rarely decides that they're going to go and waste it all again. I mean, they always have a resource. So they come back to the clinic, they fly in for 3 days, they get their, treatments done. And then they just put that in their year. As in like, I need a reload. This guy, we're going to reload with these treatments, and then he's going to release me back out to the wild, and I'm just going to run my thing. And that's good investment, right? As long as you know that you can undo something, then you feel not so bad about doing it again. And I think that's powerful for people to know that there's lifelines, right? Then I'm not so stressed.
Yeah. Oh man, that is huge. Yeah. You don't feel like you're walking on eggshells, have to be perfect. It can all just fit into life, which is
focus on life, right? When you got to focus, health was supposed to be passive. And like I said, health is a very active management now. It used to be so passive. It just used to be something that you were happy about. You got lots of energy and vitality. And now it's like, you saw it 20, 30, like I'm down, right? I might not get up. And so now it's like, just find out who you're going to connect with that can do the stuff to take that stress off you so that you can focus on other things.
100%. So genetics, I find, is becoming more and more talked about. There's more and more of these home tests. Some of them really focused on certain areas. How do you view genetics versus epigenetics in a health picture, and which one do you weight more?
I mean, they always say genetics loads the gun and the environment pulls a trigger, right? That's it. So when we're looking at like genetics, we wouldn't even have epigenetics if we didn't have all this other garbage happening in the environment to mess up genetics, right? Like genetics to me is just a little skewed, just because like when we did the Human Genome Project and we were going to look and see like all these differences between us and everybody else, like there wasn't. That's why we scrapped it, because we realized like, there's a lot of genes, but they have more ways to express themselves. So I guess we'd put more weight to epigenetics. But like our genes ran pretty good if we didn't like piss them off. Right? If we didn't, again, have all these man-made things, like we're here. After a long time, many generations. So if genetics were really that bad, like it's hard because in medicine, we'll go back to genetics, right? We'll say, wow, you got cancer because like it's in your genes. And you're like, well, like 3 generations ago, nobody had cancer. Like it was really hard to do the numbers and regress it and say like, how was it 1 in like 10,000 and today it's 1 in 2 and that's all genetics. Like, cause it's the same genetics as it was 200 years ago, but the numbers don't match up. Numbers don't match up in cardiovascular disease, certainly not in dementia, certainly not in cancer. So we have a hard time with genetics blaming it on genetics. In medicine, it's a cop out to say, oh, you have heart disease because it's in your genes. And you're like, well, I think I would have died by now, right? My genes would have died out if like we were this sensitive to like having now there's some like you can have tendencies and that's epigenetics, right? If I'm exposed to a bunch of plastics and my genetics aren't used to that, then they're going to do something different. So I think epigenetics and like DNA methylation tests to look at biological ages and some of that stuff and look at detox capacities, I think that's useful. How does that change the environment? It doesn't. Right? Like, so sometimes again, like learning how your machine runs with genetics, you only need to do that once because it's not going to change. Right? And maybe we'll get gene therapies and great stuff down the road, but we certainly don't have it now. So it all comes back to that environmental like load on our genes that is the real problem. Our genes are pretty good, right? Minus some inborn genetic errors, and there are some. But those usually solve themselves. Other than that, it's really the way that our genetics were expressed by being irritated. And when they're irritated again by man-made things, which we all did, then they probably do something different than they were intended to do, and that causes the problem. So I would put epigenetics way up here and genetics way down here.
Yeah. That's been completely my experience too. I feel like in 100 years, we'll look back and be like, well, we blame genetics on a lot of things we just didn't really understand at the time because some of the explanations I've heard, I'm like, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we should blame the environment like 99% of it and genetics 1%. And that would probably be a better way to go, to be like, oh crap, sorry guys, like we screwed this up and like our bodies aren't made to do this, because you're like, okay, so like how do we explain infertility today? Like, is that genetic? Like, come on. That's just like, we're having stupid biological conversations that we know aren't true. And like, we're finding genetic links to things because we're looking so hard to find it. But then we're like, oh, Roundup seems to be good for everybody. And it's like, well, it's not, right? Like, look, it's not good. Like we can say probably 90, maybe even 95% of cancers now are environmental. We can say that. Everybody can. Like, it's okay to say. So we're coming to that point probably in medicine because we know the genetic therapy didn't evolve like we wanted to. And it's not good for the public anyways to say like 95% of cancers are environmental. Sorry. Like, so we're always like, well, you didn't have a choice. It was your genes that did it to you. Wasn't you, it wasn't the environment. It was like your grandpa. Okay. Like I was destined to get sick. And then that's like, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense as far as ancestry goes. So we should pass that.
And just, right there, it gives the epigenetics tends to give people more power back, power over where they're headed, power over to change the direction if they want. Whereas genetics, a lot of times, like you said, it's just like, you're powerless. This is what you have. These are the cards you were dealt, and, tough draw.
I mean, we do it at the Olympics every year, right? Like we see people that are built for sprinting and people that are built for distance running. Those are genetics, right? I'm slow twitch, fast twitch. Like I know what I can. But that doesn't mean like if you can't sprint fast, you can't sprint. Like it's all fine. But if you sprint every day, all day, doesn't matter if you're genetically born to do it or not, you'll get knee replacements, right? Like I promise you, so genes allow you to do something. Training or epigenetics allows you to accentuate it. But there's like a sprinter isn't designed to like have his knees replaced just because the genetics say he is. Like it's just, that's not going to happen. So the genetic conversation just need to stop giving people, that's an excuse. We just keep giving people excuses, and then we keep medicating because their genes are bad. It's like, I don't know, take the hamburger out of your mouth. Like, what do you want me to do? Right? Like, it's hard because, again, I feel like I'm a savvy veteran in this field now. And I went through all the narratives, and those ones don't make sense. Like, we should stop making excuses and like get to problem solving.
Yeah. God, I totally agree. That's why I was so excited to have you on, because if you're in that framework, the narratives you're talking about, then you cannot solve the problem from that place, because there's these assumptions that'll keep you stuck in the loop. So having these discussions and exposing people to these ideas outside of it gives them a path to a better solution if they want it, which is really the goal.
Correct. And once you're in like one of those paths, like if you get really into like epigenetics and you never get out of that hole. And I'm like, well, people come in and be like, oh, my genes and I did all my genetic testing. This is my tendencies and my detox capacity. And I'm like, how were you 15 years ago? Fine. Okay, well, let me tell you something. Like, your genes are the same as they were 15 years ago. Right. So like, what? Like, get out of there. Right. Get out of that hole. Like, just stop. That's a contributor. But like, again, unless you were born and there was an inborn error in which like you would have known, like you were doing pretty good for a long period of time. So let's get back to doing pretty good for a long period of time. Let's get out of this biochemistry, because it's not everything, right? It's one thing. It's not everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Drobot, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge, talking with us today. Where can people find you if they want to visit your center or want to hear more about your work?
Yeah, I got a clinic in the Arizona called the Biomed Scottsdale. I have a clinic on the East Coast called Biomed New England, and then Drobot Longevity on Instagram. We're pretty good.
Perfect. That'll be perfect. I can recommend the Instagram account. I learned more scrolling through that half an hour than I had the whole month before.
There you go.
All right. Thanks again.
Okay. Have a good day.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you feel you're walking away wiser than before. I want to bring you even better episodes in the future. One way you can make sure that happens is by rating this podcast. The more of you who rate this podcast positively, the better guests I can bring you. Since you and I both know you're not going to do this later, I'll walk you through the 10-second process right now. All you have to do is follow along. Take out your phone and unlock it. Open up Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever app you listen on, and search for Wiser Than Before Podcast and click on the show. In Apple Podcasts, you have to scroll down towards the bottom, past the most recent episodes. When you get to the ratings and reviews section, click on the blank stars to rate. In Spotify, beneath the logo and name of the show, you'll see 3 horizontal dots. They're just to the right of the bell and settings icons. Click those 3 dots, and the second option is to rate the show. Hit the blank stars and fill them in. All done. You can cross that off your to-do list and start looking forward to even better episodes in the future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, even wiser than before.